Using an interview with a human geographer working in your department and appropriate wider reading, describe how they do research and what this means for producing contemporary geographical knowledge. With an emphasis on cultural and historic human geography, Dr. Laura Smith focuses on 19th and 20th century American literature to explore ecological and environmental history and how this has impacted the ideology in the 20th and 21st century ecological restoration projects. By interviewing and research Dr. Laura Smith's publications and papers on ecological restoration, we were able to find out more on how research is done and how she produces and contributes to geographical knowledge.
Our key areas of focus for the question were set out in two ways. First, we wanted to gain insight and understand Dr. Laura Smith's work and research practices through an interview with her. Secondly, we worked on how we could conduct the research ourselves with the data we had collected from our interview with Dr. Laura Smith, along with additional readings.
The field can be defined, as quoted in Cloak et al. 2012, as the particular location where research is undertaken, which could be a named region, settlement, neighbourhood, or even a building. It is also quoted in the same literature that this includes libraries and archives, wherein some researchers consult documentary sources, which means that we are also prepared to speak of historical geographers researching in the field. When interviewing Laura about her work on the Everglades conservation, clearly the field here is the Everglades National Park. However, the field here was mainly focused on archives and previous literature about various work on the Everglades. Laura mentioned that her interest was in the texts of these geographers. The field of this research was therefore largely based in libraries and archives, as many of these geographers who previously did work on the Everglades had died in the 1900s, such as Stoneman Douglas. Therefore, only research on her work was possible when Laura conducted her own research in 2017, 19 years after Douglas's death. However, Laura's plan was to go out to the field of research at the Everglades and interview many geographers tied to this field. However, COVID interfered with her plan, meaning that only online interviews were able to take place. This, at first, may have seemed very inconvenient, as face-to-face interviews were not possible. However, in our interview of Laura, she highlighted that this has actually significantly helped with the volume of interviews she was able to conduct in a short period of time. This is due to the fact that from home in England, Laura could work with different people in different time zones, meaning that sometimes even 2 interviews would be able to be conducted within a day, which would have been impossible if she had physically travelled over to the States to do them. Also, due to the nature of COVID, meaning that everyone was locked in at home, Laura said that all participants were very excited and enthusiastic to take part in the interviews due to a general lack of communication and conversation during COVID across many countries. In future research, online interviews will be taken forward to making research more efficient, cheaper, and more straightforward.
We used the method of the semi-structured interview, which gave us a deeper understanding of epistemology, the study of knowledge production. Initially, we designed a list of questions which we were able to adapt and ask in any order, whilst follow-up questions allowed us to seek clarity on responses and delve deeper into avenues not previously considered. We collected much richer data, and the naturally flowing conversations helped us develop a report. It was important to gain an understanding of Laura's work prior to the interview. Through doing some background research, it became apparent that her interests lay in environmental conservation in the last 2 centuries of American literature. We were able to contextualise our questions accordingly. We asked whether social justice issues surrounding anti-racism had been overlooked in environmental sustainability research, and/or if these issues had started to gain recognition in contemporary literature. Laura believed that geographical knowledge production had changed over time, as evidenced by her Year 3 module on activism, which assesses students via Resign, providing an opportunity to give voice to those underrepresented in society. In her own work, Laura tries to include post-colonial and feminist viewpoints to counterbalance the predominantly white male perspective seen in geographical writings. We also had to consider the location of our interview to ensure that our surroundings were quiet enough. Consensual recording of the interview allowed us to focus on what was being said rather than on making notes. Semi-structured interviews are flexible. However, they are highly unrepresentative and lack objectivity, so cannot be used to make generalisations about knowledge production. Interviewer bias also means that we may have asked leading questions, steering Laura to give specific answers and reducing the validity of our research. For larger research projects, it would be necessary to use the process of triangulation, where a researcher uses both qualitative and quantitative methods to gain the most rounded answer to a research question. As interviewers ourselves, we are actively influencing the findings of our research question. Looking to ourselves in this way is known as reflexivity. In a similar regard, the researcher's positionality must also be acknowledged, as this can affect the questions we ask and how we interpret the responses, therefore producing a subjective version of the truth.
When conducting research, it is important to consider the ethics surrounding the data collected, how it is collected, and how it is used. So we set out ethical boundaries, which included intentions such as remaining respectful. We worked to ensure our interview questions were not biased or discriminatory to prevent any harm and secure the interview's credibility and fairness. Supporting our set ethical boundaries, we aim to follow certain principles and practices involving obtaining informed consent before conducting the interview. We made sure that her privacy and confidentiality was maintained throughout by having her permission before recording or sharing any information. We believe that we successfully maintained professional conduct, adhering to relevant codes of ethics and standards of practice set by us and the university's ethic policy. Following these ethical boundaries helped ensure that the data collected was valid and reliable and accurately reflected Laura's thoughts, opinions, and experiences. Overall, considering ethics in interviewing is critical to producing contemporary geographical knowledge, as it helps maintain the credibility, fairness, and accuracy of the interview process. When discussing Laura's research method, she shared that a key source and method of research throughout her work on the Everglades was reading through historical archives. It was noted that it is important to understand the power of archival institutions and their internal power dynamics to examine the ethical dilemma of discovering and using historical information. There is not a clear line on how to conduct ethical archival research, as it does not have a direct ethical impact. However, archival institutions and researchers hold significant power and have a crucial role in understanding the past, and the way the research is shaped forms our perspective on historical happenings. As an archival researcher, Laura has had to be aware of this and her own biases when researching, and understanding that this will be evident throughout her work. We learned about the significance different research methods have on producing knowledge, and how if the methods lack good ethical foundation, the research can be invalid and unreliable. We learned that it is not always easy to be self-aware in our biases, but that it is crucial in maintaining professional standards to produce high-quality concrete work that helps better understand the world. Ultimately, having ethical boundaries and frameworks in research is what allows researchers to produce respected contemporary geographical knowledge.
The reading we looked at was a chapter from a handbook about key figures in conservation. Smith's chapter on Marjorie Stoneham Douglas is largely biographical, detailing her pioneering work into the conservation of the Everglades. She describes Douglas as one of the sharpest voices campaigning for its protection, and goes on to examine how her impact as a journalist led her on to the creation of the non-profit Friends of the Everglades, and considers her lasting legacy on the national park and wider conservation issues. When producing contemporary knowledge, we asked Laura how she established her niche from these research projects in the wider geographical field. She explained to us how she was inspired by research from her PhD on conservation sites, such as the Eden Project, and took these interests with her into her career. For this specific project, she explained how she only came across the work of Douglas after she was approached to write the chapter, so was learning as she worked. Smith detailed how she worked with a lot of text, and that by immersing herself in other writers she could get a more rounded view for her research. She described the library as her fieldwork location, as trips out to Florida got cancelled due to COVID, so her focus shifted onto literary sources information rather than collecting data in the field. She illustrated how she found using historic and contemporary sources useful, as it was still relevant and could be used to think through current issues such as COVID and the climate emergency. The process of publishing contemporary geographical knowledge is extensive, and when talking about this project, Laura compared it to her book that she had written previously, as they were very different processes. She was given a brief with a specific title and word count that needed to fit within the context of sustainability, so was somewhat limited in her research. In total, she estimated it took about 3.5 years to complete. Where COVID-19 was a limitation to some degree, Smith explained how it actually enabled her to interact with more academics at once through Zoom, as she didn't need to travel to see them. She was cautious to include a variety of voices in her piece by actively considering whose voices were being included and then whose were being excluded, and researched feminist and post-colonial perspectives who could potentially challenge these ideas.
Our concluding points are: we gained an understanding of what Dr. Laura Smith researches and publishes and how she goes about doing research. The field can involve both physical location as well as libraries and archives, with COVID recently affecting the former, arguably for the better in many cases. Using the method of the interview gave us insight into how qualitative method can help collect rich subjective data, but also limit our capacity to make generalizations about geographical knowledge production. Using an interview is beneficial, but we must be reflective and acknowledge our own positionality as interviewers. Ultimately, having ethical boundaries and frameworks in research allows for the production of respected contemporary geographical knowledge. We learned that Laura believes geographical knowledge production is changing over time and becoming more inclusive of unrepresented voices. Finally, she helped contextualize the piece for us within the existing geographical knowledge and in contributing to new contemporary knowledge.
Finally, here's a recap of our method to answer this question.